Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guest for today. Welcome, hello mentors, to our 33rd episode of Mentorships in Education. I want to welcome our guest today, Caroline Tyrwhitt. Caroline is from the UK. Welcome, Caroline.
Hello.
Thank you for being with me
you.
today.
Lovely. Thank you for having me.
Caroline and I have had some challenges throughout this process with everyone trying to do so much on FaceTime. Zoom has been a challenge for us, but I think we're going to navigate it and we're going to have a great time together today. Our focus today is going to be on women, primarily women in education, some of the challenges that they face and how Caroline is working with them and helping them, as she says, to break through their inner glass ceiling. So before I get started with our chat, let me talk a little bit about Caroline and what she's accomplished. Caroline has over 20 years experience of teaching and leading in the UK schools across primary and secondary education, both in the inner city and suburban areas. She works on curriculum. She's a teacher in the classroom. She's studied her education in Toronto, Canada. She's now an NLP trainer, and we will get into that a little bit, and she's a resilience teacher. I looked up this I Am Remarkable on Google, and I was fascinated by it. I actually signed up for some information on it, and Caroline is involved in that. That's something that we'll have a link to. She is an area leader for Women Ed, a global grassroots organization that connects aspiring and existing women teachers in education and gives women leaders a voice in education. She's written a chapter on NLP with young people to support the well-being in the school yellow book published by Rethink Your Mind, and I also looked that up. It was very interesting. Caroline set up her company, and she works with teachers, primarily female teachers, and she believes that changing thinking and beliefs is the key to achievement and success in education for both staff and students. She offers a blend of coaching, mentoring, and training to women teachers to support them to break through their inner glass ceiling. And I love that phrase because we're going to talk a little bit later about how sometimes women are so proper and modest that they don't really promote themselves the way men have been taught to do. And she helps them build confidence in themselves and learn to be good leaders. So I like this phrase also that Caroline uses, and I'm with her NLP training. She talks about it being the remote to control your brain, and I just love that so much. So Caroline, maybe you can start talking to us a little bit about women as the predominant force in education, and there are so relatively few of them who rise through the ranks. Women are often not thought of as strong leaders. Sometimes they're thought of as more, their family is their priority, and so sometimes they're not given the opportunity to move ahead the way men are. And often teachers in the classroom get so bogged down with protocol and paperwork, that they're not given really the opportunity to be creative and the way they would like to be in the classroom. So I don't know what's going on in the UK. I can tell you here that we have the same issues here. I looked up some of the statistics here and I was very surprised to find that out. So can you share with us a little bit about that and what you're finding in the UK and how you're addressing it?
So some of the statistics that we're looking at is that even though 74% of teachers are female, at university we used to talk about it as a pink collar job, really. Only 66% of them are head teachers. And the gap's widest in secondary schools, where 62%, so it's slightly less of the women are teachers, and hugely less, 39%, only 39% of them are head teachers. Then we've got a difference in pay gap as well. So 13% difference, and that's probably attributed to there being more men at the higher end of the scale, because your pay is determined by your pay grade, but it's what pay grade is assigned to you and what jobs they're actually doing. So that's that pay gap. And actually within education, it's one of the widest pay gaps in the labour market, which is really shocking, given that education should be the place where we're teaching and modelling equality. So actually women work about 95 days for free a year compared to men.
Gosh.
Which is outrageous,
Shocking.
isn't it? And, let's not even go there talking about some of the statistics and the research around women and the work that they do in the home when they get there as well, where that's not really equal either. We have academies over here, so it's sort of a semi-privatization of the public schools, and the pay gap's even wider in those. So they don't have to follow the government guidelines for pay. And there we've got an 18% pay gap, and they pay bonuses, which the regular schools don't. And then when we look at bonuses, we have a 39% gap. Only 7% of women are likely to attempt to negotiate their initial salary, compared to 57% of males. And 1 in 4 teachers who quit the classroom in the last few years were women 30 to 39. So essentially the time when they're likely to be having children. Yeah, absolutely. So long hours, lack of flexible working opportunities, lack of training about the people doing the hiring. So everyone's talking about unconscious bias, aren't they? That where we hire people like us. So if we want to actually challenge who's being hired into head teacher, principal roles, we need to make sure the people doing that hiring are properly trained to not allow their biases to influence their choices.
You also made a comment to me when we were talking, and I think this is so reflective of me, actually, when applying for a job, is that men will have a tendency to apply for a job even though they don't meet every single criteria. And women look at the list of criteria and are reticent to apply for a job if they can't fill every
single thing.
Right. So I mean, is that something you work with when you talk about teachers breaking the glass?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So being able to demonstrate what impact that you have and know what your strengths are, and actually understanding that a job ad isn't a list of things that you absolutely have to. We hire people, don't we? And people don't want to hire someone who can already do the job necessarily. They're going to be training into it. So you get men are more likely to apply to it. So this is a lot of what's covered on the I Am Remarkable workshop. So, for example, a lot of that is linked to modesty norms. So men are quite happy to brag, whereas women will not. They will see it as bragging, but actually it's about being able to talk about yourself and your achievements, and they should be factual. Women will, the imposter syndrome's more likely to get in the way of it, and they start doubting themselves before they've even got through the door, or even sent off the application, and that inner voice starts talking to you and telling you why you shouldn't send it.
Men are often, when men are strong in their opinions, when men in a leadership role are definitive, they're considered to be strong leaders. When women are strong in their opinions and try and guide a process, they're considered to be aggressive.
Absolutely.
So they have different words for men in leadership roles than they do for women. If a man is contrary, his opinion is often listened to, and people have a tendency to fall back, where women are very often called the B word because they're
absolutely
opinionated.
And that there's been research done that shows that all the qualities that we admire in a leader are not qualities that we admire in women. Yes, so that stereotype still exists out there of women should be pleasing and nurturing and kind towards others, but actually they don't want that in a leader. So there's this conflict between what people expect to see in their leaders, and that's why they struggle to see women in the position. And often women are women's worst enemies, aren't they? And then we have the syndrome, I call it the Margaret Thatcher syndrome over here. By the time a woman has fought herself all the way through to that point of leadership, you've learned to behave like a man as well. You've learned to adopt their style of behaviors because you've had to be like them almost to get there. And then those women stop changing because they then get into think, well, if I've had to work this hard to get there, everyone else has to too, rather than saying, right, I'm here now, I'm gonna get rid of all this rubbish, I'm gonna change this and make it easier to get women in place.
Margaret Thatcher's a good one to use as a role model too, because she, very few women have made it to the top and been as successful.
Oh, absolutely. And you had it with Hillary Clinton, didn't you? It was no surprise that her campaign to be president would be undermined, and people don't like her. If you take into account all that research that's been done, then people aren't going to like her because she was being a leader. So it's not going to work. So how amazing that Margaret Thatcher managed to actually do that here, when I would have thought we were more traditional than in the US, but it seems perhaps not.
So I like the comment that you made that when you were writing your profile on LinkedIn, you noticed that certain terminology was missing that women might want. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. It wasn't me who was actually writing the profile, but one of my colleagues wanted to put themselves down as a head teacher, and what they found that they only had headmaster and didn't even have headmistress. So not only are they completely backwards, that they're genderizing the role. It should be head teacher or principal. Like, I prefer the word principal almost, because it's not gendered in the first place. So head teacher is the ungendered version of it. And they didn't even have headmistress, which I absolutely loathe the word anyway. But they didn't have it as an option for her to teach. So it's the parallel for headmaster. So you would have at least thought that would be there, wouldn't you?
In the States,
and it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry. In the States, the term head of school has become more popular, and so I've noticed that people in our area where I am, they're using that rather than headmaster or even principal of the school. They're using head of school.
Yeah.
At first, it sounded a little weird to me, but I like it now.
Yeah, they use that one here as well, because there's so many structures, because we have trusts and academies, and so there's several schools within a trust, and you'll have principals in charge of several schools, and then they call the head that's in charge of the individual school the head of school. So here it's all layered anyway. So for each thing that we might find an ungendered title, it's used in a different way, but head teacher is still around. And I quite like head teacher because it reminds you what they are underlyingly, and because I do believe that the school leader should be a teacher and understand what it means to be a teacher.
And the term teacher is gender neutral. So.
Yes. Yeah. So head teacher is gender neutral.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me get into a little bit what it is you do as a coach and working with certain women. I'm assuming that you work primarily with women. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. I only advertise for women, and normally you might get a man or two that objects to that and will try and sign up for something. I had a colleague recently that was talking about this, that they'd set up an academy for women's leadership, and a man wanted to know if they could join up. She said, sure, unit 1 is about menopause, menstruation, etc. Do join us. And
and it was one of these, well,
she never heard back. So yes, and there are things that are specific to women in leadership, and so the physical side of it, the managing of a home and children often, and it seems that imposter syndrome, while men do sometimes have it, it's much more common within women. So that looking over your shoulder, thinking you're going to be found out at some point, plus questioning whether you deserve things, and whether you're good enough for the job, or you're too much or too loud, or you're too something. There's always too something for a lot of women, not good enough. And so I would work with women around that and start changing that thinking that we are just plain good enough as we are.
What are some of the things? What kinds of issues within their school structure are they coming to you with questions about how to deal with these things? What creates an environment where female teachers in particular are feeling suppressed or feeling
not being heard?
Yes.
Yeah, not being heard is a big one. So when you get in meetings, I even had it when I first stepped up into leadership. I had been working with a male colleague to create this system. It was primarily my idea, but I worked with them to link in with what they were doing, and then he turned around and presented it as his work in the very meeting that I was sitting at. So you can get real extremes where men just feel so confident that they're quite happy to even lie, let alone brag. And often you'll find yourself cut off. Your idea is just ignored and passed over, and then someone else is giving the credit for your idea later. So if you're on leadership teams with another woman, you can start echoing and repeating what they say and support each other. And it was Barack Obama actually who they started doing it in his administration to repeat what people whose voices aren't normally heard are heard, so that it's illuminating their voices, it's called, to actually get women's heard. So sometimes they're afraid to be visible. And definitely that saying, well, I did this and I did that. Like I said, I recall I didn't sit there. I was so shocked that a man would actually, while I'm in the room, take credit for my work. I actually couldn't say anything. My jaw just dropped, really. And I'm not normally lost for words, but I was certainly lost for words in that moment.
Wow.
And actually it was a sign of that one was a toxic school in that leadership. So that actually got bigger and bigger as of excluding particular voices.
Were you able to address that at some point, or did you just have to let it go?
Essentially it was let go, really, because the head teacher just laughed as if I was telling nonsense. Yeah, so it had to be let go.
So that's probably one of the things that you coach women to do. There are times when they have to just let it go.
Sometimes.
What are some of the other ways that you coach women to address these unpleasant situations or these controversial situations that
well, yeah, so the language that we use as well, so using language that's low conflict. So for example, not using the word but, which is immediately conflict, but using the word and instead is really useful. So that learning to say no without actually saying no is another one. So I teach them agreement frame for that. So that's using and.
Can you give me an example of that? What do you mean?
Oh,
an example
off the top of my head.
Just you know.
I appreciate that you need that document for tomorrow morning. And I need to go home right now, and tomorrow morning I will support you to make sure that you have the data that you need.
Rather than you need that document in the morning, but I need to go home now, and it is okay.
Yeah, exactly. And no, I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
So you haven't said no there, have you? You've not done. You've agreed to provide them with the data, but in a completely different way. Yeah, you haven't gone down into the nitty-gritty on it.
So what are some of the other ways that you encourage women to respond to perhaps comments that are made when they're present, which are really someone's opinion about what they're doing rather than factual about what's going on in their classroom? I know that sometimes women are concerned about being observed, and they're so afraid that and I'll speak about me, when all the years I was teaching, if something was going on in my class that was a little bit of conflict in the classroom, I didn't want my principal coming in at that moment. I wanted them to come in when everything was perfectly smooth and running and I was in total control. And so I felt that this was a time I did not want to be observed. And my principal, would call me in and say, what was going on then? It didn't look like something very good was happening. It was good that was happening. It was a learning moment, So.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're educating them, isn't it? So that question, so it depends on the culture that you're working in there, isn't it? So one, we have the perfectionist idea that's in there, the idea that we can't have any faults whatsoever and no one should ever catch us out. So I do a lot of work around that done is good enough, because often perfectionism holds us back because we don't get started because we're always trying to make it better. We're not good enough. Then it makes us afraid of other people's judgments because we don't want anyone to see us as less than perfect. And what's interesting with that is we've usually got our own inner critic that's been going on at us, telling us how rubbish we were at that. And then on the other side of it, we're not accustomed to taking praise either. So when actually someone tells us we've done something well, as women, we tend to go, oh, it's nothing. Yeah, oh, I like it. Yeah, we write it off.
True,
so there's all these conflicting stuff that is going on in our heads, that once we can start trying to work it out and work through it, we can see how we're actually inconsistent in all of our needs and our responses here, and then we can start responding to them rather than reacting to them. When we start to build our self-awareness and hear what is going on for ourselves and actually observe ourselves from the outside, and then we can be less judgmental about it, and actually we can learn to look for what we are good at. So I might work with clients, for example, when I say, well, what are your strengths? They're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm just like, okay, I want you to pretend to be your head teacher or someone who knows you. And I want you to be them. I want you to take on their body language. I want you to imagine that you're sitting in their chair or standing in your room. And I want you to tell me what you see in you. And I want you to use the word she. Yes. So really learning to go from looking at you from the outside and being objective about you. And actually that's a really useful strategy that I find my clients really like that one.
very intimidating in some cases, a very uncomfortable position, for someone who's coaching me to put me in. It would be really hard for me to do that at the beginning.
Of course it would. And growth happens when we get outside of our comfort zone, doesn't it?
Right.
We're much more comfortable sitting in ourselves and just sitting there criticizing ourselves. And this is not helpful. It's personal. It's often judgmental. And once we can learn to get outside and be objective about ourselves and see what other people see in us, then it's much more helpful. So I use that model to build our ability to praise ourselves, to see what we do well instead of this nonsense, the stories that we're telling ourselves about how we're not good at something, because they're invariably not true.
It's a loop that runs through our heads all the time.
Correct.
I know you have a whole list of things that you do to work with your clients, but one of them that interests me that I want to have you expound on a little bit before we move on is this at cause versus at effect. You don't say cause effect, you say at cause and at
or
effect.
at effect.
So talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So people who are at effect in their life are looking to blame other people for things. When you shift to at cause, you take responsibility for everything within your remit, if you like. So we can't change events outside of the world. Yes, we can only change how we respond to something. So someone who is at cause would see opportunities and solutions. Yes, someone who's at effect would see all the problems. So someone who's at effect would feel like they're the victim in their life story. Someone who is at cause, they're their shiro. Yes, they're getting out there. It's like, okay, I can't change that, but I'm changing this, and will make those changes. So they're leaders rather than followers, that sort of thing.
Now, I know that you are a coach using a particular approach. You use
NeuroLinguistic
Programming, right? My tongue always twists on that one. And I had never heard of that before, and I looked it up a little bit to try and understand a little bit more about it. So maybe you can speak to that, talk about how you implement that with your clients. And I'm curious I did look up a little bit about the approach and how it compares to some other approaches that someone might use. And I want to understand more this idea of a conscious or an unconscious process. So maybe that would give you a place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at what Freud had said years ago and what neuroscience is now saying now, that our conscious mind, what we're using actively, is a really, really, really tiny part of our mind. And the rest is going on in our unconscious. So, for example, when you first started to drive a car, you were doing it all with your conscious mind. And it was really hard work. And you thought you were never going to be able to work out how you could manage to focus on the steering wheel and on the accelerator, the brake, the clutch, and change gear. And watch your mirror and the car in front and the car behind, etc. Once you learn, it gets on autopilot to the point we can actually drive to work and forget we've even made the journey. It's like, how did I get here, isn't it? And that's our unconscious mind doing it. So, and we all have these habits that we go through life, and then we're building those up. And that's our unconscious mind that holds all our memories and holds all those habits. Now, some of them are helpful and some of them are unhelpful. So, for example, our decision making is done by our unconscious mind. Our conscious mind might say yes or no, but it's all done with our unconscious mind, with the values that we've gathered through life, with the beliefs that we hold about ourselves and others and how the world works. So once we start bringing into the conscious what we've been doing unconsciously, then we can start making some changes and updating that thinking and those values and beliefs, and then putting that back, and we can start changing how we behave, really, and how we respond to what is going on around us.
So I did read a little bit about the two men who started this in the 70s, Richard Bandler and John Grinder,
I think Grinder, I would say, yeah.
It was very interesting, their approach, their philosophy, and it actually evolved from this idea that most of what we do is in our unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And by changing our values and our perceptions, we can make conscious decisions without having it be so grinding on us, trying to fight what we want to do. That's coming, that, the unconscious mind is kind of fighting with the conscious mind, as you said. So I thought it was rather interesting. We're going to have on the website some of the literature, the research that's been done on NLP, so that people can read a little bit more about it if they'd like to do that. But when you're working with clients, how do you implement NLP? How do you get people? I mean, it's such our values, our perspective of life is so deeply ingrained in our core. How do you begin to get people to change that?
Well, it's just updating. For the most part, most of us aren't conscious about our values at all. How many people actually have sat down and said, what are my values? So, for example, I would suggest we write your own mission statement, and you can actually look at what values you've got in life and what's your core value. So I know that for me, making a difference is one of my core drivers in life. Education is one of my core drivers in life. Empowerment is one of my core drivers, because I've done those values and looked at them and made sure that I'm focused on them. It's the beliefs that are a little bit harder, but and NLP is about scrambling modalities. So all of these things are stored in our brain in like pictures, in sounds, and in feelings and textures and all sorts of things. And we can scramble those modalities, and we can map one picture and one sound onto another, so that the brain muddles it all up, and you can borrow from a good experience somewhere and put it onto a negative experience.
So
so you experience it differently.
The idea of, I'm sorry, is a delay, and I apologize. The idea of a mission statement is a tool that you're giving to your clients to help remind them.
They'd have to create it,
yes. But the idea of creating a mission statement. What would be some of the other tools that you might guide your clients, for their toolbox of different things that they might be able to pull out, and when they're practicing the process of NLP?
Well, they don't really practice the process of NLP. NLP is about modeling excellence. So NLP has come about from studying how people who do things well. So, for example, if you wanted to, I would suggest they go and model someone who is a leader that they admire, and actually start looking at them in detail. What language do they use? How do they actually stand? And what's their thinking? Ask them what their thinking is through different processes, and actually really study in detail how they do their job so well, and ask them the questions about that. And what do you do before that? And then what came before that? And then what do you do? So, because so much is done in our unconscious, we don't actually know what we do. So it would actually be quite nice if you're being studied, because someone is making you actually think about what it is that you're doing that is coming across and being so powerful to someone else. So it's about going and finding a model. They could do that. Looking at beliefs and what we change. Our language is so very powerful. Our language affects our thinking, and it reflects our thinking as well. So just observing ourselves and doing an inventory of our language that we use, either in our head or out loud, will tell us an awful lot about what's going on with our thinking for us and how people might be perceiving us. So definitely working on our language. I make sure my clients get rid of need, must, and should. These are not helpful words in our language. Yes. So those are ones, no one needs to do anything. Choose what you want to do and then go and do it well. And if you're thinking you should do something, according to whom? Where have you got that from? Yeah. Because that's not about you. If we feel like we should do, it's not coming from within. That's an external expectation that we have taken on. So actually dig down into that and see whether you actually want to do that, whether that is right for you, or whether you're going to think, actually, no, you can keep that one. I'll skip it. Thank you. Yes. Often we get trapped in doing what we think we should do. So, for example, that's a good one. I think time management is about energy management and priority, what's important for us. And how many things I will get people to look at your to-do list, what sort of things slide to the bottom each day. And I could bet your bottom dollar that the first things that gets done are the things we think we should do. And the things that are on the bottom are the things we want to do. Or it's about fear in there. So something we're afraid to do, something that's important to us, but we're afraid to do it, perhaps.
I find that some of my students, when they say, I should do this, or I must do that, have put blinders on. It's almost myopic thinking, and they have stopped looking at options of what some other way they could address the situation, a project, or whatever it is they're doing. And so I think what you're saying is very applicable to students as well as some of the adults. We're told we have to address something a certain way. You need to do this. You should do this. You must do it this way because this is the outcome I want. And someone has prescribed a linear path to get there, and it may not be the only way to get there.
Yes, absolutely.
You used the term flip the script with me. What is that all about? Is that another way of addressing some of these issues?
Absolutely. So that's about reframing. So in any situation, no matter how dire it is, there's an opportunity somewhere, and to look for that. And it's also, for example, if someone described, some people might get in their identity that they're stubborn or something, because that's the word that's been applied to them. But actually, when we reframe that, that's determined. We can change the context that it's in. And stubborn is actually a determined person, isn't it? So it's, just change the story. Let's look at it differently. Flip that upside down and what's on the other side of that coin.
Flip the script is something you can almost say to someone that you're working with, and it's a mnemonic device to help bring them whole bunch of process to remind them about a whole process that you've been working with. So
stop, breathe, and think how else this could be. What's the other side to the coin to this? Especially when we find our buttons are being pressed and we're being pulled into a situation, or we're not sure what to do. Have a look on the other side and see when someone has described us in a way that we find unhelpful, how can we turn it around to be helpful? So when you're given feedback that you don't like, for example, how else can you look at that feedback and how can you frame it in a different way? Because we not necessarily understood what the person was saying precisely anyway. We don't know. We can never get 100% into someone's head, can we? So we can't know what they're actually thinking, and whatever they've said, we have put that into our map of the world, is how I would say it in NLP. So we've taken it on according to all our beliefs and all our thoughts, whereas actually when it's coming from then, it could come from a whole world of different thoughts and understandings. So always look at it and see how you can work with it.
Right. If I open up my toolbox and I pull out collapsed anchors as an option for me to address something, what would I be working with?
So anchors are, we're all anchored to things. So an anchor is something that creates an automatic response in us. So, for example, what are your buttons? Something that happens that you automatically respond in a particular way. That could be from the phone ring in the house, that you go into a state of panic, for example. The head teacher standing outside your classroom could send you into a state of panic because you're anchored to seeing them there, and it sets off a particular train of thinking for you. As simply as, when we see if they put the Coca-Cola train Christmas ads on in the middle of the summer, they wouldn't have to say the word Christmas. We know that sound, we know what's coming, don't we? Yes. And you'll be sitting there going, Christmas? Yes. And because it's the wrong time of the year. So those are anchors. And sometimes we can have anchors that really don't work well for us. So, for example, I had a student that I realized that I was saying, I really don't like going into this class. I hate teaching this class. And I realized actually they were the nicest class in the school, apart from one child. And that child pressed my buttons so badly that my hairs were standing on end on my arms before I'd even got in there. And now I'm responding to him, or reacting to him rather, in ways that aren't helpful to me or helpful to the class. And my whole energy was focused on dealing with him. And when I came out of it, I felt like I hadn't enjoyed my lesson, but actually it was this one person. So I managed to, I got someone to collapse that anchor for me. It's a particular technique that we do of, again, mapping the picture in our brain over to something. And I just wanted it to be indifference. I didn't need to like the child, but just to be indifferent to him, as opposed to the effect that it did have. And just by collapsing that anchor, I was able to then go in and enjoy teaching the class for who they were, because he was not able to press my buttons anymore.
More neutral, rather than
yes.
taking it personally and
yes, absolutely. And I've helped people who have to manage someone who presses their buttons. When you've got someone on your team and the minute they say something, that's it. You can feel yourself. Yes, your whole body changes, doesn't it? Our physiology, we can change our physiology and change our experience. So when you feel yourself going up, you can make yourself go back down again, and you can then react from a different place. But it's an anchor that's happening to us in that moment. So by collapsing it, that head of department was able to respond very differently when managing that person. And they came from a calmer place. Yes, and the minute we're coming from a calmer place, we're much more effective.
Yes, because we're not responding emotionally,
Correct.
responding with forethought. And I admit that sometimes I don't do that. Probably more with my own kids when they were growing up than when other people's children. But you've given us some very good tools. These are things that you would work with a client on. The idea of collapsing anchors, the idea of not using the word but and not using the word but and using the word and. Eliminate should, would from your your vocabulary. Reframe.
And another one is try. Eliminate the word try.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to try and get up earlier tomorrow versus I'm going to get up earlier tomorrow. Try absolutely presupposes that failure is an option, isn't it? And you're allowing yourself to do it, as opposed to if you take it out, you have decided, I'm trying to leave work early. Then what I'm hearing from that is you're failing, because you haven't decided that you are going to leave work early and do it. You keep trying, which allows you to stay late still and say, oh, well, I didn't manage it. Yes. Whereas if you take try out and just decide, you will put the energy focused on what you want and get there.
Caroline, you've given us some amazing things to think about. And I know that you have some stories that you could share a little bit about with some of the challenges you faced in the classroom, not just with other clients that you work with, but with students. And perhaps you could end the talk with some tips on how you address. You gave us one example with a
Yes.
student, but do you have some others you'd like to share with us?
Yes, so watching your own language in the classroom. And so in the classroom, I ban the kids from using the word but, because it creates conflict. So there is no but in my classroom. When they say, I can't do that, I can't do this. I hear teachers saying, well, just try. No, I actually ask them, and when did you decide that?
Oh, interesting.
Which is a different question entirely, because they have decided that they can't do that. And for some of them, they look at you completely bemused, and other times they'll actually be able to say, I'll have them when they're thrown out of maths, I can't do maths. And I've asked, when did you decide that? And they'll say, in year 3 with Miss whatever. And they can tell you that moment. And so actually, when they do that, you can work with them on undoing that. Well, actually, I would just say, do you trust me enough that you would like to try and work on that and change that? And there's a NLP technique called timeline, when you can go back and relook at the situation with your older eyes and relearn the situation. Because when we learn something young as a child, we've learnt it as a young child, and all our beliefs, including the limiting beliefs, come from our childhood, something that someone said to us and our understanding of that moment. So we were able to go back and look at that situation with her teenage eyes and relearn what it was. She's like, oh, so it's not that I couldn't do it. Correct. And then she can then go forward in life, feeling more confident about her ability to do that subject. Obviously, by the time we get them and working on that as teenagers, there is a large learning gap. So now she really is going to be genuinely struggling, isn't she? Because she spent years telling herself she can't do something and then getting mad at the teachers in the meantime. So can work in that way. We've helped students collapse their addiction to Coca-Cola so that they can concentrate more in the classroom, because they can work out that that's the problem. I've had a student that was dropping around school, refusing to go to any lesson, and I just asked him to put in one hand, going to lesson is one choice, and in the other hand, not going to lesson. And there's a whole technique that you can bring them up and you can get them to work out that they've actually got the same thing in common. They've both got your higher positive intention in common.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you chunk it up, you can get there. What was interesting was with this child, I just said, so what does that feel like, in the going to lesson hand? And what does that feel like in the not going? And he just looked at it. And the goal with that technique is to pull your hands together. And normally it takes a bit of work getting there. And he just slammed his hands together, not knowing that was what my intent was to get him to do. He just said, I'm going to lesson. And off he went and sat in his lesson. And he didn't disrupt it or anything. He sat there and he did his lesson. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I use anchors with the students. I create their circle of excellence one, so that when they walk into my classroom, that they believe they're the best English students that ever walked this earth. There's an NLP spelling strategy to put it into your visual memory, rather than the students who are trying to do it by sound. And that's really powerful. Use that to really increase spelling ages. So yes, there's an awful lot of them. Spotlighting to anchor, so that students learn that when you stand here, that's when you're going to give them instructions. When you stand here, that's when you're telling them off kind of thing, so that they just, you can stand in particular places. So they automatically, when you stand in the place where you're going to tell them off, they know that you're about to tell them off. And so they just go quiet, for example. Yes, they'll sort it out because they've become anchored to you being there. It's called spotlighting. So there's absolutely lots of things that you can do. And perceptual position, we use it with when you've got to make difficult phone calls home to parents, putting yourself in the position of the parent so that you can actually really and truly understand their point of view, and then using language to build rapport and to influence the conversation. You can then have both parent and teacher working together on the child. So the uses are endless, and it's all about reducing conflict and building relationships. And when teachers and students have a great relationship, attendance goes up, achievement goes up, engagement in lessons goes up. It has absolutely everything positive about it. And NLP helps you build relationships even when you're dealing with students who are struggling.
How many of us want to learn something from someone we don't like?
Yes.
From someone we don't feel comfortable with?
Yeah,
from someone we
absolutely.
sit there and think about all the negative parts of their personality that, offend us. And teaching, much of it is about building relationship with your students. And, you just addressed that. You've given us so much food for thought here. And I think actually, from my perspective, the last few minutes have probably been the most interesting for me, because I'm writing things down that things I'm going to look up later and see if I can incorporate some of those into the work I do with my students. If people want to get in touch with you, we're going to give them links to do that. Someone may have a question. I hope that they will, our listeners, parents and teachers alike, and other mentors who are working with students, will question you about some of these things. I know that you work with people individually, but you also do some group things. Is that right? I
do. Yeah. I'm open to doing group coaching session or group training session. It's interesting. I don't really do NLP training online because there's so many techniques. It's just not suitable to do or use. But you can't do the whole practitioner bit of it, but there's aspects of it that you could do online for teaching teachers, for example, teaching teachers to use it in school. That's more than possible. So if a school wanted to look at doing that and training a group of teachers, we could delve into that.
That's what I want to make sure. If people are interested in doing that, they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely.
Caroline,
flexibility.
Thank you so much for your persistence, your good sense of humor, and I very much appreciate your patience in getting this together. I hope our listeners will pursue learning more about you and your work. I hope that people will get in touch with you if they have any questions, pursue the concepts and approaches that you're mentioning in this NeuroLinguistic Programming approach, which is something I don't know very much about, and perhaps other people would be more interested in learning about. And check on the links that we're going to be posting so that they can pursue you. They can find you on LinkedIn. And I'm going to make sure that we have some links on some research and so forth in this area. So I want to thank you so much, Caroline, for being with us, and thank the mentors and listeners for being with us today. And I hope you will continue to follow us with the new guests that we have coming up and some of the interesting topics we're going to be pursuing. Thank you all. Be safe, stay well, and be connected. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and mentorship and education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time
and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.